A Simplex converted to a Great Western Railway Prairie Tank Part 41, cleaning up the dirty and rusty coupling rods and connecting rods, plus starting work on the wheels. It's currently 11 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of December 2020, Christmas Eve. And it's snowing outside in England at the moment, and I'm sat in my recording studio voicing over this video. And I really must warn you before you watch it that this is a very boring video. I've managed to edit it right down to a short, watchable video. It actually took me about 2 hours to do this job. And I must admit that I lost the will to live on several occasions when I was making this video. In the plastic pot I have some stuff called panel wipe, which is naphtha. It's also known as lighter fluid. It's the same stuff that I used to put in my Zippo lighter when I was a smoker. I don't smoke anymore, I just sniff the lighter fluid instead. The first part of the cleanup job is to completely remove all the old sticky oil from the coupling rods and the connecting rods, because very shortly, to remove all the specks of rust, I'm going to use a flapper wheel in my Proxxon motor tool. But if I go straight in with the flapper wheel, all the old oil and grime on these parts will just clog up the flapper wheel. When I first got this engine, because it started off being a job for a customer, but I realised that the amount of time it would take me to actually fix it up would be far in excess of its value to the customer. So in the end we agreed a price and I bought it off him. When I first looked at the rear coupling rod, I thought, oh yeah, look, a crack in the coupling rod, but it's not. It's been silver soldered, and silver soldered very well. This is not a problem because the engine's run successfully for quite a few years by the look of it with this silver soldered coupling rod. I would say there's a definite problem with the quartering on this locomotive. I'll look at that in detail when I start to put the engine back together, but that's a fair way off at the moment. I cleaned the rods the best I could using a combination of my wire brush, some Scotch-Brite, some wet dry sandpaper, and it was obviously going to take a ridiculously long length of time, so it's time to call in the cavalry. Here's my Proxxon motor tool with the fitted flapper wheel, making short work of all the grime and the rust, even on the underside and the rear of the coupling rods. I really don't recommend using a drum sander attachment because these are far more vicious than a flapper wheel, and all you'll end up doing is cutting grooves into your connecting rod. You can cut a groove with a flapper wheel, but you have to hold it in position for a long time and press on hard. In this clip I'm cleaning the underside of one of the rods where I didn't clean the oil off first. This contaminated the flapper wheel and it took quite a while before it started cutting again, but I got there in the end. I would just recommend always remove the old oil first. This is a brass wire brush and they're really useful things to have in the workshop. I use this a lot for cleaning parts or removing paint or just generally anywhere where I need a wire brush. It's not quite as aggressive as a steel bristle wire brush, and it's great for the areas that I've just shown where I can't use the flapper wheel. However, the flapper wheel has another use. You can buy them in various diameters, and the smaller diameters are quite good for rounding the end of coupling rods after you've machined them. Normally the ends of these rods are shaped by using a milling cutter in a milling machine and carefully rotating the coupling rod around a post in the machine vise. And this method of shaping coupling rods and connecting rods doesn't always give a good finish. But this does. You have to be a little bit on the careful side, and you can use it this way, but it's not recommended unless you practice for a while. Various different diameters of small flapper wheels like this are available, and I have a much smaller one, but that's a bit worn out. But bear in mind, these flapper wheels constantly reduce in diameter as you use them. Cleaning up the rods actually took in real time over an hour. But it's worth it because look at them now, they are a lot better than they were to start with. I must admit they're not perfect, not very pretty, but at least they've scrubbed up very well, just like several girlfriends I had in the past. That's possibly the last girlfriend joke of 2020, although I'll try and get another couple in before the new year. This is a tin of WD-40, and I sprayed the coupling rods and the connecting rods before I put them in this red plastic box. This is where I'm temporarily keeping all the parts that I take off the engine. Now it's time to look at the wheels. This is the rear wheel set, and the red part is a brass shroud over the axle because this sits underneath the ashpan. It's a really good idea that you seldom see. It stops the ash from getting into the joint between the axle boxes and the axle and wearing the axle prematurely. I've seen some very good examples of very badly worn axle boxes. one extremely oval, and they're usually the ones underneath the ashpan. What I'm doing at the moment is cleaning up the outer face of the wheel, and I'm doing it by hand using a piece of Scotch-Brite. And as you can see, the outer face of the wheel has cleaned up very well. Someone has made a real mess of this wheel by drilling holes, threading them, and fitting grub screws to lock the wheel to the axle. This is so unnecessary. You would normally fit one grub screw in from behind after locking the axle onto the wheel using Loctite 603. What I'm doing here is using my flapper wheel to clean up the front surface of the wheel. I need to remove all of the paint, and as you can now see, the centre of the axle stands slightly proud of the centre of the wheel, and this is how it's meant to be. But unfortunately it makes the Allen grub screws look even worse. Just for a change from cleaning up the front of the wheel, I thought I would remove all the silicone rubber from the brass axle box shroud. Now it's time for some very vigorous flapper wheeling on the front of the wheel. This part needs to be roughened up a bit and really clean. I'd just like to mention that I tightened up every one of the grub screws in the wheel against the axle using a small Allen key. Just look how many grub screws there are at this side around the axle. Maybe the builder bought a job lot of grub screws and needed to get rid of them. To clean up the outer rim of the wheel, as before, I used a piece of Scotch-Brite. Here I've removed most of the paint from the brass shroud, and I'm just checking the suspension. This is going to need further cleaning up, and I'll show you how I do that in a future episode. Rotating the brass shroud against a coarse piece of emery cloth soon keyed it for the next coat of paint. Back to the wheel. I have a small amount of paint to get rid of just around the axle. I'll do that before the next process. I almost forgot to clean the inside of the wheels, and the inside of the wheels were very dirty and a bit rusty. Now it's fun time. This is JB Weld, a 2-pack epoxy resin. I use this a lot. It's really good stuff. This is the 24-hour version. It takes 24 hours for it to set, and here I've mixed the two parts together, and I'm applying a copious amount around the edge of the axle, mainly filling in the holes of the grub screws. In the next episode you will see what I did to improve the appearance of the wheel. I coated each side of the wheel with the JB Weld and then left it for 24 hours for it to set. And that's it for this episode. I'd like to wish everyone who celebrates Christmas a Merry Christmas. And I'm very pleased to say I don't have any more Christmas shopping to do. It's all done. Stay safe and stay well. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.